Charlie Kirk began coming under pressure from his own base. I would say, I actually forgot which year it was, but it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And it was called the Groyper Wars. And Charlie Kirk would do these TPUSA tours around the country, and young men would file in, and they would, you get to question Charlie Kirk and debate him. And they hit him from an angle he never expected. They were from this organization called the Groypers, which sort of follows Nick Fuentes. They're anti-Israel. They're kind of anti-Jewish. Some people call them white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. They're very anti-Israel, and they believe they're the true voice of America first because the U.S. government has fallen under the control of this malign foreign power in Israel. And so they would confront Charlie Kirk with a history of, for example, the USS Liberty, the U.S. naval ship that was deliberately struck by the Israeli military in the 1967 war in order to cripple that boat because it was a surveillance boat. It was listening to Israeli communications. And they killed scores of sailors. And they would confront Charlie Kirk with the difference between Israeli interests and American interests while holding up a cross. And Charlie Kirk would just shut down the conversation because he knew that if he would give an inch to them, it would threaten the relationship with his donors and TPUSA would collapse. Now, after October 7th, the pressure was just too extreme. The whole grassroots of the conservative movement, everyone under 35, started to question the U.S.-Israel relationship because they wanted to be America first. And they saw Netanyahu just leading Trump around by the balls. They saw Miriam Adelson, this Israeli intelligence asset billionaire, just calling shots inside the White House. And a lot of them are pro-life and were horrified by the slaughter of babies that they saw in Gaza. So the bottom dropped out of right-wing youth support for Israel to the point where now only about 25% of Republicans under 35 support Israel over Palestine. So Charlie Kirk has to answer to his own grassroots base. And you can hear he's starting to make some noises. He's talking about October 7th possibly being an inside job. Israel let it happen in order to carry out long-term political goals. He starts to question whether Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli Mossad agent at a time when the Epstein files were becoming an uncomfortable issue for Trump. And it all blew out into the open at TPUSA's July Youth Summit in, I believe it was Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
Might have been Tallahassee.
Yeah, Tucker gave the speech.
Right.
Right.
So Tucker gave a speech. I mean, that was the seminal moment. But it wasn't just Tucker. Megyn Kelly had started questioning Israel, and she's on stage calling Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent with Charlie. Comic Dave Smith, who, like myself, is a Jewish anti-Zionist, but he more comes from kind of the libertarian world. So he was welcomed on stage to debate a Zionist propagandist who works for Newsweek, Joshua Hammer. No, that's not something you want, especially at this point, if you are like a pro-Israel enforcer. And Dave Smith was openly talking about the slaughter of children in Gaza, and the crowd was cheering in this cathartic way. Then Tucker comes out, says, you should have your citizenship yanked if you fight for a foreign army. All right. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of American Jewish youth go to Israel and fight for their army instead of our own. So that's a direct blow to not just the Israel lobby, but like the whole concept of Jewish communal life as it's understood by its leadership. Then Tucker calls out Bill Ackman, who's one of the biggest Netanyahu money men inside the U.S., who's pulling strings at Harvard, getting their funding pulled unless they crack down on Palestine activism. And he questions Bill Ackman. He calls him a scam artist and said, how did he make $9 billion? Like, where did it come from? I mean, and Bill Ackman, the next day, he couldn't really answer the question. He published like a 5,000-word meltdown Twitter post trying to defend his financial investments. It was just bonkers. I'd never seen anything like it. And it was all Charlie Kirk's fault for giving basically the people what they wanted. And after that, he started getting publicly attacked. Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, the two biggest Zionist enforcers in the media, who are very close to Netanyahu, biggest forces lobbying Trump to wage war on Iran, went off on TPUSA, said we can't be having a Big Ten if it includes kooks. Laura Loomer, we all know who she is. She publicly attacked Charlie Kirk and said he basically had to step down. He was getting attacked in pro-Israel media. What we didn't know, which I learned, is in private, the pressure was even more intense. He was being bombarded with text messages. And at some point, Netanyahu personally called him and offered to basically fund his organization to new levels that he never even imagined, which meant, Zionist Israeli takeover, complete recapture of TPUSA, an organization they basically helped create. And Charlie Kirk turned him down. After Charlie Kirk was killed, we know that Netanyahu wouldn't stop posting about him. Like minutes after he was killed, when his body was still warm, Netanyahu was posting about him, interrupting his seven-front war in the Middle East and his global assassination spree, where he's trying to kill people even inside a U.S. ally in Qatar.
Can you remember any time that in the history of a political assassination that the leader of a foreign government has come out to deny that they were behind it? I mean,
never seen anything like that.
Right. I mean, yeah.
I mean, it was so Netanyahu has to ultimately deny that Israel was involved in an interview on Newsmax with Greta Van Susteren. Newsmax is another institution that Israel controls. Its CEO, Chris Ruddy, was just in Israel with Netanyahu, basically shining his shoes in public. So Netanyahu goes there and says, this is like to accuse us of killing Charlie Kirk or having a role in this is like a medieval blood libel and the Holocaust. And when Netanyahu says that, it probably leads some Gentiles to wonder if there was something to those blood libels. I mean, when someone that sleazy and that blood-soaked links innocent Jews to the murderous campaign that Israel's carrying out, it's bad. It's actually bad for the Jews when he says that. But I've never seen anything like this. And I've never seen anything like what Netanyahu was doing relating to a tragedy or a crime in the United States since 9/11. Netanyahu blamed Muslims for Charlie Kirk's killing explicitly on Fox News. He was trying to milk it as much as he could, but it blew back on him because he's become a prime suspect. But after 9/11, Netanyahu said in comments widely reported in Israeli media, you can look this up, he said 9/11 was good for Israel. And it's the same way that he saw Charlie Kirk's killing as being good for Israel. He thought he actually probably thought a Muslim was responsible. And he thought he could blame the left and the Palestine Solidarity Movement and get them shut down by the FBI. And so in a way, he was kind of thrilled by what had happened. And that fuels the speculation. But the real issue was, as we learned from a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk, who had spoken to him, I would say, a week or two before he was killed about this, he was afraid of Netanyahu, and he was afraid of these billionaire cutouts of Netanyahu, many of whom had funded his organization.
So let me ask you a question.